Hello again, my friends and fellow Invisibles. We've got a new series I'm starting. It's actually a new old series. You remember I was doing that series on the forgotten history of Britain? And this is a continuation of that. And we're going to look into a legend, you could call it, maybe it's the truth, that the British are descended from the lost tribes of Israel. And that means it's not just the British, but also all the diaspora countries of the British Empire, particularly the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and to an extent the other countries like South Africa, who are part of the former British Empire. And it's not just the British and the British Empire we're going to look at. We're going to consider Europe as well as being one of the locations where the lost tribes went to. Now, I know there's other people doing lectures on this subject, and people are looking for these lost tribes all over the place. They're looking in China, they're looking to Afghanistan, they're looking down in Africa to Ethiopia. You know, these lost tribes seem to get everywhere, in the opinion of various commentators on YouTube and so on. But I'm an evidence-based man, and I don't like to take people's opinions. I don't do that. I want to see the hard evidence for things. And how I came to this whole subject anyway was kind of serendipitous. I think I told you in at least one of my earlier lectures that I went to Israel, the country of Israel, way back in 1972, and I stayed there through the winter and into the spring of 73. And while I was there, I was working in a youth hostel for part of the time, and I met an elderly gentleman with his Bible who was always going through his Bible. He was sitting in a corner, nobody would speak to him. Strange individual. But something in me made me go up to this guy and say, "Oh, hi, how are you doing? It's so interesting being here in Israel at this time, it must be the end days, mustn't it? This time when, the Jews have come back, Israel's come back." He says, "Well, the Jews have come back, Israel hasn't." I didn't know what he was talking about. I didn't understand at that point that there was actually two kingdoms. After the time of King Solomon, the kingdoms were split in two. You had a southern kingdom called Judah or Judea, which gave rise to what we now call the Jews. But that was only a small part of what had been the empire or the country ruled over by King David and King Solomon before that, where there are other tribes, 10 tribes, who had rebelled against the crown and the authority of Judeans of the southern kingdom, the descendants of King Solomon. They said, "We have enough of you and your high taxation, we're off." They started their own separate country which took the name Israel. So Israel and Judah are not the same thing at all. You could say that Judah is part of Israel, but not all of Israel is Judah. So not all Israelites were Jewish. And that might seem very shocking to some people to hear that. But when you go back into your Bible, you discover there were 12 tribes of Israel, descended from the 12 sons of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Judah was one of those sons, but there were 10 others, and along with the Judeans, the Judah people, was the tribe of Benjamin, and also the Levites, the descendants of Levi, who were the priesthood. So you could say there were already 3 tribes in the southern kingdom. There were 10 tribes in the north because there are actually 13 tribes. This is confusing, isn't it? Because the 2 sons of Joseph had been adopted into Jacob's own family by Jacob. He promoted them, if you like, up a generation, so that they would have a bigger share of his will, you could say, what he was leaving behind, the promises that had been made to him. So the Levites were the sort of 13th tribe. They weren't landholders like the other 12. They were a priesthood, and they were looked after or paid by the others for doing that. So this was a big shock to me, to discover that there was this separate kingdom of Israel, and even more shocking that they had disappeared from history. And we're going to look into that in later programs. But when I came back to England, I was walking along the street. This is the serendipitous bit. I was walking along a street called Buckingham Gate, which is in London. It's parallel to Victoria Street, and I was walking down there on the other side of the road from Buckingham Palace, and I saw there were some very fine, big old houses there, Georgian or maybe Victorian or older than that, I think. And I saw in the window some pamphlets, and a brass plaque by the street said British Israel World Federation. And I thought, what's this about? Is this something Jewish? What's going on? And again, something in me made me go in there. And I went in there and I found there was a reading room with books and leaflets, and an old lady called, I remember her name to this day, Miss Margaret Wurr, Whurr, Miss Wurr. And she was like something out of Edwardian times. And I got talking with her, and she showed me various pamphlets, and I bought some of these, and two of these I've still got here. And they were written by a gentleman called W.E. Filmer. Now, I don't know what the W.E. stands for. Perhaps it's William. I should think it's probably William Filmer. But anyway, she told me that this guy was the expert on migrations, because I asked her about this whole idea of the lost tribes of Israel coming to Britain. It seems so ludicrous to me, so extraordinary. You know, how on earth could anyone think this? But I was curious. I'm a very, very curious person, and I do like to look into things and probe things. And I don't take things just because someone says it to me. I want the evidence. So I bought these pieces and these two leaflets. One is called Our Scythian Ancestors. Well, that's odd. And the other was called Lost Tribes Found in Assyrian Archives. So I bought these. I didn't really understand them too much, I must say, but I kept them and I put them aside. And you know what? Later on, I came by these books, which are the Assyrian Archives. And I've got them, the two-volume set. And what these are, these Assyrian Archives, you can see here, they are translations of, if you go into the British Museum and other museums too, you'll find these great big reliefs taken from places like Nineveh and Nimrod in Assyria. Syria is sort of like what we would now call Kurdistan, I think, roughly, the core kingdom of it. And they built palaces there. The Assyrian Empire was very, very powerful, and people didn't really believe they existed until sort of mid-19th century. A guy called Layard, a British archaeologist, started doing excavations there, and they found these palace ruins with these great big reliefs with pictures of the king going into battle and firing arrows and chasing lions, and cities being sacked and the captives taken out, and loads of writings on these monuments. But they also found a library of the records of the various kings, or many of them, on clay tablets written in cuneiform script, which is, if you've never seen it, it's made of like nail-like markings, which group of these together make a letter. And then people have worked out what these are, and they've been able to translate them. Rather like the Rosetta Stone, there are places in Persia or Iran where you get the same text in the local dialect of Persian, in the language of Assyria and Babylonia, and also in Greek. So you had these triple things, and you could translate. If you knew what the Greek says and you knew what the Persian says, you can work out what the Assyrian, Babylonian, Chaldean scripts mean. And people have done that. They translated all of these archives. Extraordinary work. And I must take my hat off to these Assyriologists in the British Museum and other places who've done all this work and then published these books, giving us the records. And they tally very, very closely with what we're told in the Bible, certainly in the periods that concern us. And we're going to go into all of that in the course of these next few lectures I'm going to do. And we're going to look at these pamphlets, and I'm going to go through them in detail and show you the evidence. And we're going to actually look at what Khymry claims is what they say in the Assyrian records. Well, I have the Assyrian records here, and we can look it up, and we can check him out, we can fact check him, and that's what we're going to do, and you'll be amazed at what we're going to discover. But having said all that, today we're going to look at something different. We're going to look as if there is a connection between ancient Israel and Troy, because you have to understand that there weren't any lost tribes until 722 BC, and 722 BC is well after the Trojan Wars. So you can't have Israelite escapees, lost tribes going to Troy if there's no Troy there for them to go to. So it has to be something else. So we're going to be looking into the Bible, actually, and we're going to be examining the story there, and then we're going to see how that can connect with the story of Troy. And the reason I want to do that is because there is this tradition in Wales particularly that the Khymry, the Welsh people, came from Troy initially. And we're going to be understanding that better, not just in this lecture, but in the later ones that we're going to do as well. So I'm going to go into some things here. And what I want to start with is go back to, in the book of Genesis, the story of Jacob. And you know that we've talked a lot about Jacob in other lectures. And if you haven't seen those, you really should look at my older lectures that are on YouTube. But he was the grandson of Abraham. Abraham, you've all heard of. Abraham was going to sacrifice his son Isaac. The angel stayed his hand. All sorts of promises are made to him. And both the Arabs and the Jews looked to Abraham as their patriarch through different sons. But his son Isaac, the son of promise, they say in the Bible, he had two sons as well, and the preferred son, who got the blessings, was Jacob, the son of Isaac, the grandson of Abraham. And Jacob then had visions of angels going up and down a ladder, and had a wrestling match with an angel, and promises were made to him about what would happen in his life, what would be done. And eventually he has 12 sons, And one of them you probably know very well, the Joseph of the many-coloured coat, who was sold into slavery by his brothers and went to Egypt as a slave. But he had this extraordinary ability to interpret dreams. He's a very charismatic, very kind man, and everyone loved him. And he saved Egypt at the time of famine. And because of that, he rose up and he became the Pharaoh's right-hand man, his vizier, second only to the Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. And so he was able to save his own family, forgave them for what they'd done, his brothers. He said that that was meant to happen so he could save them in this difficult time. So you have these 12 brothers and their now elderly patriarch father Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel. Before he dies, he's going to give them prophecies for what's going to happen to them. And we looked at some of these, I think, in earlier lectures, but I'm just going to go through a couple here now. You find all this in the book of Genesis in chapter 49. It's the second to last chapter. So it says here, Jacob blesses his sons. Then Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come." Now, when he says you, he's using the son as the overall family of that son, the tribe, the posterity, what's going to happen to all his descendants. He's going to lay it out for them. And he does so in very symbolic ways. And many of these symbols, actually, you can see how they've come true. Anyway, assemble and listen, O sons of Jacob. Listen to Israel, your father. So he starts off with the first son, the firstborn. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity and preeminent in power. Unstable as water, you shall not have preeminence, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. So Reuben, the eldest son, apparently he slept with his father's mistress, or I don't think it was one of his wives, but probably one of his concubines. And his dad hasn't forgotten that. So he's not going to be preeminent because of that. In other words, he's not going to get the primary blessing that you would normally think would have gone to the eldest son. He's been denied that. Then he says here, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. O my glory, be not joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and in their wilfulness they hamstrung oxen. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. So this harks back, I think, to an episode earlier on in the book of Genesis. The 12 brothers had a sister, and the sister fell in love with a young man from neighbouring peoples where they were sojourning at the time, and she had an affair with him. He slept with her, but this was regarded as rape by the brothers, and the local people there said, no, it's not our fault. We want to be like you. We like you very much. So what happens then is that, they say, okay, well, you can get circumcised and you can, be like us. So they're all circumcised, these men of this town. And then the brothers come back, particularly these two, and while the men are all sore from being circumcised, they come at them with swords and they kill them all. So that is their fierce wrath. They were getting revenge for their sister, who they believe was raped. Was she? But anyway, so Jacob is aware of this, and he's not going to let them, the next two. So it's the first three sons have been put out of the equation as far as getting their father's major blessing is concerned. He's already done a big blessing in an earlier chapter on Joseph and Joseph's sons. So you'd have to look at that chapter to see about them. And that blessing is on particularly onto the sons of Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh, who are Jacob Israel adopts into his own family. But that's another lecture, and I'm not going to go into that here. So now we come to the fourth son, who's Judah. So he says here, Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you have gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares rouse him? So he's the quiet, strong, quiet one. He's like a lion, but a lion who's crouched down. He's had his fill. He knows what's what. He's aware of things, but don't poke him. Don't arouse him. It's not a good idea to arouse him, because you might not like it. No, he goes on here, he says, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. So we have this sense of Judah. This actually, the wine business, the garments washed in wine, is actually a prophecy about the Messiah, Jesus Christ, who's described in the book of Revelation as treading the winepress of God's wrath, and his garments being stained red from the winepress, and he wields the sword, and he holds the rod of justice, as he's going to punish the enemies. And he is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So Jesus is actually born from this tribe. So that is a prophecy there. But the whole idea is that the tribe of Judah are going to be the kings. They don't have kings at this time. The tribe of Judah doesn't become the kings until the time of King David. King Saul was not of the tribe of Judah. He was the one that was chosen by the other tribes. But God's appointed one was going to be David. And you come to that in the first book of Kings. So we have all this, Judah is now, he's being promoted. He's getting this major blessing and prophecy that should perhaps have gone to his eldest brother, Reuben. But Reuben had betrayed his father by going up to his bed. And his two sons below him, they were wrathful. He didn't trust them. They were too angry, and they're going to have to be scattered in Israel. Well, the tribe of Levi was certainly scattered. I don't know about which is one, Simeon. I don't know about Simeon. If Simeon was scattered, I'd have to look into that. But certainly, the tribe of Levi was scattered. They were the priesthood, and there were a few here, a few there, a few the other. So anyway, that's the prophecies that are given to Judah. Now I'm going to switch us over and take us to, yes, the lost tribes of Israel and ancient Troy is what this lecture's called. We're going to look into this now because it has a connection, as you'll discover, with the tribes of Israel, or particularly one tribe. Now, I was mentioning Jacob's dream at Bethel, and his name was changed to Israel. He dreamt about the angels going up and down the ladder. Now he's resting his head on the pillow stone, not well represented in this picture, but anyway, he takes the stone he's been resting his head on while he's been asleep, and he raises it up, and he pours oil over it, consecrates it as an altar, and makes a covenant with God. And curiously, the coronation stone in Britain is called Jacob's Pillow. That's one of its names. And it is the covenant stone of the royal family with God. And it's this stone that we have in Britain that's used in the throne at coronations. You would have seen it in the recent coronation of King Charles III. There it was in the coronation seat. And this stone goes back to Scotland, and from there it came from Ireland, and it's said to have been brought to Ireland from the Middle East, from Israel. So we'll go into that another story, but this is the idea that there is this throne of God on earth, the kingdom of heaven on earth, is what it's all about. And the nation of Israel, the 12-tribe nation of Israel, was meant to be a blessing that would bring law and order and the true rightful ways of administering things. But they became corrupted, and they fell apart and were divided and punished. And the people expelled from the land by the Assyrians. So you can see something of what's going on here. Now, of the 12 sons of Israel, we were talking about that in the what I just read to you. Reuben defiled his father's bed. Simeon and Levi, both cruel progeny, and they are to be scattered in Israel. That's what we just read. So that brings us to Judah, and he's going to inherit kingship. And then there are other prophecies for the other tribes, and I'm not going to go into those here, but you can see them listed there: Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Joseph, and Benjamin. So those are the sons of Israel who are going to become tribes. King David and his son Solomon were descended from the tribe of Judah. You can look that up in the Bible, it's very clear. After Solomon's death in 931 BC, the kingdom was divided. 10 tribes rebelled to form their own kingdom of Israel. They disappear from the biblical history after they are carried away by the Assyrians in 722 BC. I think there's one or two mentions of them after that, but pretty much they disappear, and we don't know what happens to them. Two tribes, Judah and Benjamin, along with most of the Levites, the tribe of Levi, been scattered, remained with the line of Solomon. This kingdom was now called Judah, and some of them too were taken by Assyria, but the king of Judah remained until 586 BC. So actually we think about Judah as being carried off by the Babylonians, but it was really only Jerusalem. The Syrians did go through the land of Judah as well as Israel, sacking and deporting people from the other cities and towns of Judah. It's only a remnant that was left at the time of the Babylonians, and they were carried off to Babylon, and then they came back, or some of them did anyway. Some remained in Babylon. And then you get the build-up again of the Judean kingdom, the time of the Maccabees, the Greeks, eventually the Romans coming in, and King Herod, and then the final rebellions against the Romans, and they get deported out of the land by the Romans. They expel them all. And they didn't come back again until 1948. So we talked about that in other lectures, and it's all to do with the prophecies about Israel and Judah. Don't think it was any accident them coming back. It was all prophesied in the Bible. It's all there if you only read it. Anyway, there's some debate about the correct dates for the Trojan War. Archaeologists tend to accept the Greek version of the event that puts it in the early 12th century BC, the fall of Troy around circa 1184 BC. So that's when archaeologists tend to think the Trojan War took place. I think it was rather later than that, but that's another story. I think it was more likely 850 BC, around then. However, this is much too early to have any connection with the lost tribes of Israel. They're not even lost until 722 BC. So where does Troy fit into this narrative? Yeah? Well, why are we even talking about Troy in the context of lost tribes? They certainly weren't lost at this early date of 1184, or even in a later date of 850, say, but they would have been happily living in Israel itself, in Canaan, or whatever you like to call the land. They were there then. So why do we talk about Troy? Well, we're going to go into that now and start to investigate this story further. And the story of Troy is confusing, not least because the so-called Bronze Age, Dark Age has distorted modern interpretations of ancient history. Now again, the Bronze Age, Dark Age, archaeologists believe that you had the sort of Mycenaean period, Mycenaean Greeks, and Troy fits in with that. And then kind of everything goes on hold. Nothing much happens. There's no new layers until suddenly you get new layers being formed, hundreds of years later at the beginnings of Athens and Sparta and all those city-states. And curiously, the people are still speaking Greek. They're still wearing much the same clothes. Their culture and civilization seems to have done a sort of sleeping beauty for a few centuries and then suddenly woken up and begun again. And they call this the Bronze Age, Dark Age. Well, of course, there are other people who would argue that this is just a fudge on their part, trying to make dates fit in with other things. But that's another debate for another time. But either way, if there was a Bronze Age, Dark Age, or if there wasn't, it's all, the Trojan thing is all long before the fall of Israel and their deportation by the Assyrians. From this we can safely say that the Trojans were not descended from the lost tribes of Israel. So I make that clear right now. I don't think the Trojans are descended from the lost tribes of Israel. But that doesn't mean they're not descended from Israel. Neither were they descended from the Khymrioi or Chimerians, who do seem to have been of the lost tribes of Israel, and more on that later. We'll talk about that when we get onto those pamphlets that I was showing you. The Chimerians did not make their appearance in Western Anatolia until circa 672 BC, when they conquered Phrygia. Ancient Troy was by then a distant memory. So who were the Trojans and where did they come from? Now, I'm going to go back now to Judah, this fourth son of Jacob, Israel, and we're going to look into his story because it's a fascinating one, and one I think that you'll find quite amusing as well as everything else. So it says here, to answer this question, we have to go back to the Bible and look again at the story of Judah, the fourth son of Israel, who it was promised would one day give rise to a line of kings. Judah, your brothers shall praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down before you. Judah is a lion's cub. From the prey, my son, you are gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as a lioness, who dares raise him? So he's not to be, he's a toughie. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until tribute comes to him, and to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. So that's the tribute coming to him is what happens at the time of David and Solomon. Binding his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he has washed his garments in wine, and his vesture in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. Now, I'm going to read you out most of chapter 38 in Genesis. So it says here, it happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hirah. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and she called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. I don't know where Chezib is. Perhaps I should look it up. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Now, Tamar means beautiful in Hebrew, so she's obviously a beautiful girl, and it would seem that she is an Israelite, having that name. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. So Er's not a good guy. He's a bad guy, in fact, and he's put to death by God. What does that mean? Lightning bolt, or just mean he had a stroke or a heart attack or something? I don't know. But anyway, he dies. Then Judah said to Onan, "Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law and raise up offspring for your brother." So it seems that they had a law in those days that if your brother died, left behind a widow, you had to go and make her pregnant in the name of your brother, give her offspring in his name, not in your name, in his name, so that she's, for very practical reasons, so she'll have someone to support her in her old age. It's an absolute tragedy for a woman not to have a man, a son, or at least one son, maybe more, to look after her in her old age. So that seems to have been a law at that time. It's not for your pleasure that you do this. You're doing this in the name of your brother to make sure he has posterity. And she's looked after. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his, they'd be his brother's. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. What he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. So this is why we have the term onanism generally used for masturbation, actually. But actually that was not the sin that Onan committed. The sin he committed was denying his brother's wife, his widow, his seed, so that she would not get posterity in his brother's name. And that would mean that she was not going to inherit anything from the family, or her children. She wouldn't have the children to inherit anything. So all the more for him, or so you might have thought. And of course he got a younger brother as well. But that didn't work, and God struck him down as well. So that's 2 out of 3 dead. And things not looking good for family Judah. Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah my son grows up, for he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. So Judah's afraid he's going to lose his third son the same way. Is he going to get struck down as well? This woman seems to be bringing bad luck on the family. And in the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. So Judah's wife has died. And when Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, Come, let me come into you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. So she said, What will you give me that you may come into me? So his wife's died, he's gone through a period of mourning, he's feeling a need. So he sees this, what he thinks is a prostitute, and he thinks, I really need this. So he answered, I will send you a young goat from the flock. And she said, If you give me a pledge until you send it. And he said, What pledge shall I give you? She replied, Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand. So he gave them to her. So he's given her his staff, the signet ring that's on his finger, and the cord. I suppose that he had a cord tied around his middle maybe. And so he gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men of the place, Where is the cult prostitute who was at Enaim at the roadside? And they said, No cult prostitute has been here. So he returned to Judah and said, I have not found her. Also the men of the place said, No cult prostitute has been here. And Judah replied, Oh, let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her. Well, now the story becomes even more interesting. About 3 months later, Judah was told, Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, Bring her out, let her be burned. So you can see the double standards here immediately, can't you? Her husband's died, she's a widow, so she has sex with someone. His wife has died, he goes to a prostitute and has sex. Nobody's going to burn him at the stake. Anyway, bring her out and let her be burned. And as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, By the man whom these belong, I am pregnant. And she said, Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. Then Judah identified them and said, She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah. And he did not know her again. When the time of her labour came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labour, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, This one came out first. But as he drew back his hand, behold, his brother came out. And she said, What a breach you have made for yourself. Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterward his brother came out with the scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So that's the story of Judah, and I think it's rather funny. Clearly, as far as the Bible's concerned, this was really God's work. He wanted something like this to happen. He didn't want this wife of Judah's that he had chosen, this Canaanite wife, to inherit the promises made to Judah, or her offspring. He wanted it to be an Israelite, and Tamar was the Israelite, and he kind of fixed it so that it would come down to her being the one who would give him the sons that were needed. I think it's interesting here to see that Judah gives her his ring and his staff, and he says, as you saw earlier, that she can keep it. So she's got his staff and his ring and his cord. And in the prophecies for Judah, the staff will not depart from between his feet. So that is signifying that her children are going to be the ones who are going to inherit the staff of rulership, and also his signet ring. And the signet ring denotes the family. It denotes the truthfulness and the legality of the marriage. So he's actually given her his ring. That makes her offspring legal. They're not to be considered illegitimate. They are legitimate. And he has actually done the job that Onan was meant to do, which was to give her children in the name of her dead husband. So he's done better still. She has the children of Judah himself. So this puts right the wrongs that have been done both to her and by Onan and by That's all been sorted out now, and she has two healthy sons, twins, who are going to inherit all of the promises made to Judah. So the staff and ring symbolize Judah's own rights of inheritance from the prophecies of Israel, that the staff shall not pass from between the feet of Judah. Thus he himself has fulfilled the duty of giving children to the wife of his firstborn. And there we see an illustration of the children being born. So Judah, with Tamar, his daughter-in-law, gives rise to Perez, and he puts his hand out first and has a red cord tied around it, and Zerah, who actually is born first but didn't make the first breach. So Judah's sons by Tamar, the widow of his eldest son, these sons inherit the royal promise made to Judah. And here we see the posterity of these sons by Judah and Tamar. So you have Perez, who's also called Phares, and a descendant of his in due course will be King David, and a descendant of King David in due course will be Jesus Christ. So that is the Perez line. But there's another line, you could call it the cadet line, of Zerah, and he has 5 sons. He has one called Khymry, another one called Ethan, one called Heman, and one called Calcol, and one called Dara or Dada. Now then, that takes us to where we want to go. And if you look at the family tree of the Trojans, the Troy, or the first foundation there on the Dardanelles is by Dardanus, and Dardanus is actually Dada or Dara. And in the annals of Troy, or the Greek interpretation of those anyway, the father of Dardanus was Zeus by Electra, who was a kind of nymph. Well, you could say that it was Zeus. Zeus is the father of the gods. And you could say it was actually God who made this happen, of Judah begetting the necessary children through this cunning woman, Tamar, who sorted things out. She's the Electra. So you could say that Zeus was sort of acting, the father of the gods, sort of acting through Judah to make this happen. And she was sort of doing what was required. And that gave rise to Dardanus, Dada. And he's going to be the father of all the future Trojans, the Trojan race that descends from him, going right down to Priam and Hector and Paris and all those people that we meet in the Greek myths and legends. And also to the stories to do with Aeneas, who goes to Italy, and that leads to the foundation of Rome. And also his great-grandson Brutus, who goes to Britain with the Trojans. So here we have the connection between the Khymry of Wales and the original family of Jacob, Israel. And as I said, the stone of Jacob comes to Britain. And we'll go into that in a later episode of this. And I've written a whole book on the Stone of Destiny. There's some extraordinary things to do with that I'm going to tell you in due course. But I thought you might like this little story as well, not an aperitif, but a starter for our main, before we go into the main course of the whole thing to do with the lost tribes of Israel and their migrations, what that's really all about. We'll go into that in the lectures which are to come. So thank you very much again from your time, and I hope you enjoyed this. And you can begin to see now how things are slotting together, and we're beginning to see how history is engineered, not always by human beings doing their own thing, but there is a higher power directing how history unravels. And you read in the Bible that it's actually God who brings the Assyrians into Israel, because he's so affronted by what they've been doing, the Israelites, sacrificing to Canaanite gods and sacrificing children and this kind of thing. They would really become decadent. He wanted them out of his sight, get them out of here. And he uses the king of Syria to do the job for him, to take them away. But he says they're not going to be lost forever. They're going to lose their identity, and they'll lose their language and their customs and everything. He's going to sift them through the nations, and eventually he will bring them out. And he will, bring them back. They're the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So we'll come to that when we get into the future stories. But I thought you'd like this aperitif and the connection with Troy and the Trojans, who are also going to be banished from their homeland and sifted through the nations, and things are going to happen to them too. But eventually all of them are going to be reunited. So thank you very much, and we'll talk again. Bye for now.